Open your eyes to banks that are robbing you. You know who my favorite president was? Who? Thomas Jefferson. Because he saw all of this coming and tried to stop it. He fought the banks. JFK too, and they killed him for it. The banking institution is more dangerous than an army, he said. He also said that every generation needs a revolution, Jimmy. The American dream is just that. Just a dream. War is a continuation of politics, only by other means. Politics is a continuation of economics by other means. This is our bank. This is our war. And this is our plan of attack.
Banks have become an essential threat to our democracy. So consider this justice.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio! The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Good afternoon. My name is Ella Free, and this is the very first podcast of Whistleblower Nation. First off, I just want to say I couldn't be more grateful to be working with such an incredible group of people here at Revolution Radio. Everyone has been so warm and inviting and helpful to me, so I just want to give a shout out to them. But please bear with me through any technical glitches and hiccups that may occur. And I want to say thank you, Ahmad, for producing the show today. Really appreciate it. Well, let's first talk about the meaning of the word whistleblower. In a country where speaking the truth is sometimes regarded as treason, I have the utmost respect for people who stand up to injustice. A whistleblower is a person who makes public disclosures of wrongdoing, corruption, and crime. The courageous people who do so often suffer retaliatory actions because of their disclosures. This show is dedicated to all you courageous whistleblowers out there who step up to expose injustices when and where other relevant government agencies and social institutions fail to do so. My main goal is to provide a platform for whistleblowers to share their disclosures and tell their stories. I also want to celebrate the heroism of unsung whistleblowers to help encourage more and more people to engage in this important civic duty, because shining the light on wrongdoing wherever it occurs plays an important role in keeping society peaceful, free, and just. So that right there is the purpose of the show. Today, I'm going to introduce you to a topic that is near and dear to my heart. It's a crime that needs to be exposed, and it needs to be exposed the most is because it's one that is actively harming thousands and thousands of outspoken victims, yet does not get any official recognition or action at all. The most important current examples of such crimes are organized stalking and electric harassment, which are harming untold numbers of so-called targeted individuals across the globe. These are covert crimes, so they're easy for the law enforcement and government officials to ignore, even those whose duty it is to enforce the rule and law and protect public safety. Many of you probably haven't heard about these covert crimes before. They're big, they're complicated topics, and I think one of the best ways to introduce you to these crimes is to have a victim and whistleblower tell you about his criminal targeting in Vancouver, Canada. And that man happens to be a dear friend of mine, so I want to welcome Dr. Matthew Aaron. First off, I want to tell you a little bit about him. The crimes of organized stalking and electronic harassment are so pervasive and destructive that Dr. Aaron is using an alias to protect himself from future retaliation and targeting. Dr. Aaron happens to have a master's degree in environmental toxicology from Virginia Tech and a PhD in neurobiology from Cornell University. As a recipient of the prestigious Fulbright Scholarship, Dr. Aaron also spent a year studying chemical engineering at the University of Karlsruhe in Germany. I hope I said that right. He has authored 34 peer-reviewed publications in the world's top scientific journals. Dr. Aaron's scientific training and background helped him make certain insights about the high-tech criminals and crimes that were perpetrated against him up in Canada. So hi, Matthew. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Ella. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I have a little bit of a cold, guys, so bear with me. But, as the saying goes, the show must go on.
Thank you for the generous introduction.
No problem. You have a very, academic background. I think that's important for credibility's sake. And I guess the first question I have for you, since this is a new topic for many listeners, is what exactly is a targeted individual, Matthew?
A targeted individual in the sense that the community of victims that I'm now a part of uses refers to an individual that has been targeted by a new form of covert crime that involves those two elements in various degrees that you mentioned: organized stalking and electronic harassment. Are you there?
Yes, sorry about that. You caught me and I was running to grab a notebook real quick. Okay, so I guess my question to you is, we understand that this has happened to you. When did you first notice something was out of kilter when you were up in Vancouver, Canada?
I left that last question. I gave a short answer to that last question. And I just wanted to, let me just say that these are very big and complicated crimes. And I think over the course of this interview and podcast, we can explore that more. I did give a very brief answer that doesn't do justice to the complexity and the destructiveness of these crimes. But I think over the course of this podcast, we can hopefully convey more about what those topics are all about. So your question to me was, when did I first notice something was going on in Vancouver, correct?
Yes, correct.
Well, I was not targeted before I went to Vancouver, and I had taken a consulting job at an environmental consulting company that basically has clients mostly in the mining industry. And I moved into an apartment right in the center of downtown Vancouver. And even on the first night that I moved into that new apartment, this apartment was up on the 15th floor, and it faced the alleyway, not the street in the front of the building, but it faced the alleyway. And just across this fairly narrow alley was a non-residential building in which I noticed a lot of really bizarre activities. Are you still there, Ella? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay. And we can get into some of those activities, but it was over the course of time that I realized that there were people in this non-residential building 24/7, and they were actually doing a lot of what you could call spying or voyeurism, or even it actually looked like surveillance of other downtown residents and myself. And they were also engaged in like visual harassment of residents. And this activity slowly escalated over time. And I made it clear to them that I saw what they were doing, and I even confronted some of the people that were leaving that building on the weekend. I actually confronted them in person to tell them that what they were doing was outrageous and criminal, and that if they didn't stop, I was going to try to expose what they were doing. And then that confrontation precipitated a 6-week period of intensive targeting when I realized what electronic harassment is all about. So in the initial phase, over the course of 2 years, I was on the recipient end of low-level harassment, and in hindsight, what I regard as low-level electronic harassment. But then when I was targeted with sort of like the full force of their what do you want to call it, perpetrator squad, then it really amped up, and some of those the attacks just came one after the other, and they were I perceived them as having life-threatening force at times. So I eventually had to just abandon everything in Vancouver. Fortunately, I did collect some what I think of as potentially significant evidence along the way when I was finally abandoning my apartment and leaving all my things behind. But I was literally pursued across the border by a harassment network. And then I think I managed to shake their tail after arriving in Seattle, because since starting the next day, I haven't experienced any more of the harassment or following. So either they decided to leave me alone, or I actually managed to evade them and get off their radar.
Yeah, from what I understand, that's rare too. So I applaud you for being able to escape them.
Yeah, that's one thing we should make clear. I think the listeners, these might be very new topics to the listeners. So maybe we should go back and explore just in general what I'm giving you my version of these new topics of targeted individual, electronic harassment, and organized stalking. But maybe we should explore those a little bit further to give the listeners an idea of what we're talking about. One key thing to point out is that I came to realize later that there are thousands of people around the globe. I mean, it's hard to count. Many of them are probably not speaking up because this is a very terrifying kind of vigilante crime that involves basically organized crime networks, the way I view it, possibly with some government involvement at some corrupt level. But there's people making allegations of being electronically harassed. That is a euphemism, by the way. It is much more dangerous than what people would think of as harassment. These are weapons that they're using, high-tech weapons. And there's, so basically you and I both know that this is a big issue affecting a lot of people.
Yes. Yeah, probably tens of thousands, if not more. It's one of those things we can only speculate the numbers.
And I think it's pretty fair to say that the number of people that are speaking up is probably just a small fraction of the total number of victims, because these crimes are terrifying, and oftentimes when people speak up, as you mentioned at the outset, people who speak up against injustices and crimes, they often get retaliation for doing so. So probably only a small fraction of people are speaking out about these crimes right now.
Yeah, I agree. Well, maybe we can backtrack just a little bit. We touched upon the topic of the weapons, the electronic weapons. Can we go into a little bit of detail about these weapons and what you experienced, and maybe various other weapons that might be out there?
Well, I think so. I had my firsthand experience, which I documented in a report that I sent to the Attorney General of Canada, the RCMP, the Chief of Police in Vancouver, the Mayor of Vancouver, and the FBI. And I was careful to document that without reaching out and checking internet sources for other stories, because I wanted to keep my allegation unbiased. And just based on the principles and the effects that I experienced, I was pretty sure that the weapons that were used on me were basically analogous to anti-personnel weapons systems that are in development and even in use by the U.S. military that use radio frequency energy, which includes microwave energy. There are also, it's also likely, or sorry, I didn't mean to say likely. It's also possible that sonic weapons are being used, and those would probably be most likely to be, if they are used, ultrasonic weapons that are above our hearing range. And so the two kinds of weapons together are what's referred to as directed energy weapons, because they basically fire energy sources in a directed fashion or a beam-like fashion, and because sound is invisible, and if it's ultrasonic, it's not audible either, and the same is true of radio wave energy and microwave energy. It's invisible and it doesn't make a sound. And so when you beam these at people, basically what you can do is do attacks on someone that can happen right next to bystanders. I'm talking like feet away from bystanders. And the person can be targeted precisely and covertly, because it's not like a gun. If someone started shooting a gun at someone, there would be bullets left in the street, there would be casings left, the sounds would be heard, and that's more of a traditional form of assault. But these new kinds of assaults come with a whole new range of tactics, because really these are covert implements, covert weapons.
Let's see. Can you go into a little bit about the physical sensations? I know these are very, very painful weapons, and I'm just curious what how you perceived it as far as the physical part of this.
Well, let's introduce the listeners to a bit of news that's circulating right now, because that's relevant to your question, and that is approximately at the end of last year, beginning of this year, around that time period, diplomats were being targeted with mysterious electronic weapons in Cuba. And this is now hitting the mainstream news, and the story is not going away, which is something that the targeted individual community is glad to see. This is starting to get some coverage. And these, I think the number now is 21 U.S. diplomats. The number is up to 21. In addition, 5 families of Canadian diplomats in Cuba, I'm not sure of the location, I think it must be Havana, were targeted. They were targeted in places like hotel rooms and even in their own homes. And this is, any of the listeners can go out and look at these stories for themselves by just searching on these keywords of like mysterious assaults in Cuba against Canadian and American diplomats. And what the victims in this case reported were things like grinding sounds in their ears, or buzzing sounds, and trembling in their body, and also hearing loss. And some of them, many of them went to the hospital, and some of them suffered mild to moderate brain injuries. And these symptoms, which are now in the mainstream news, documented, are very, very much like the kinds of things that targeted individuals who don't get any help from police and who don't get coverage by the media are reporting. So it seems like that cluster of diplomats got attention from the media because, first of all, because they're diplomats, and because it was a cluster of many people, and it's hard to keep that quiet. So what targeted individuals in the community of victims that you and I are both a part of, we're trying to do activism to raise awareness. In fact, there was a call last night in which Linda Costanzo, who is one of the moderators and activists in our community, she enumerated a list of common effects that are alleged. I'm using that word alleged because I'm trying to be fair and objective, but reported, I should say reported. The effects that are commonly reported by targeted individuals, her list was something like pain, stinging sensations, an electrical feeling in your body, a buzzing sensation, a tingling sensation on your skin, very uncomfortable. Also, immediate onset of nausea, extreme nausea, uncontrolled body movements. The effects can also include dramatic mood swings like immediate anxiety, fear, depression. Also, these attacks can leave lesions on your body. Those have been documented by many people, and these would include things like sunburn, like bizarre sunburn spots appearing on your body where you feel the pain, maybe minutes to a couple hours after you felt the pain, welts, bruises, capillary damage, not just in random spots, but in the spots where you feel these jolts of energetic pain entering your body. It can be accompanied by hair loss that's inexplicable. Like in my case, one time I was hit on one of my eyebrows, and a big welt formed there, and half of my eyebrow fell out. It grew back, fortunately. And then we get on to the more exotic effects, but which also have a scientific basis. Believe it or not, people report the microwave auditory effect, or what people in our community call V2K, voice to skull. And that is under certain circumstances, and not everyone gets this, but when the perpetrator groups have certain devices, they can send a modulated signal which actually can have a voice, cause a voice to be heard only to the targeted person. And I can get into the details behind that. That is a scientifically validated effect. It's called the Fry hearing effect, or the microwave auditory effect. And then there's more exotic effects that are not really substantiated in the scientific literature, but so many people are reporting them that there seems to be some capacity of these weapons to stimulate your visual system, and even inside of a room with no windows, create visual effects like snow on an old-fashioned television. Someone might see that in their visual field, or even see it when their eyes are closed, or even faint moving images. And the most commonly reported images are what you might think like a sadistic criminal male going through puberty might send, like images of surgery or pornography, or just use your imagination, vile images like meat rotting and turning into maggots, things like that. These are incredible harassment tools. Now, under extreme cases, they can cause heart racing, or even the feeling of your heart palpitating and not beating correctly, going into an arrhythmia, and inability to breathe. And then in very extreme cases, they can cause you to have an epileptic seizure, or to become paralyzed. And then generally, as soon as the energy field is shut off, your body rebounds, and these effects like magically disappear, though the welts and the residual pain inside your body, which can last for a couple of days. Some people have permanent scars from these attacks too. That's a pretty good overview, I think.
So people can't see the weapons at all? No one can see that you're being harmed? Because that's really frightening.
Well, no, that's the whole culture, the criminal culture that is associated with this is all about hiding in plain sight and using, it's actually kind of designed to make the victim report strange effects, which are not really regarded as legitimate in the general public or by the medical establishment. A lot of police are probably in the know about this, but they can basically, in addition to actually torturing a victim, physically torturing them with microwave energy, they can drive the victim down towards a diagnosis of delusion, because these crimes are so covert. So to your question about how these assaults can be done covertly, the microwave energy can pass through many materials. Things like if the viewers know about ground penetrating radar. Ground penetrating radar is a radio frequency signal, and clearly ground penetrating radar can penetrate through several feet of soil. It can penetrate through concrete slabs to a certain degree. There is some reflection and some absorption, but these devices can be fired at you from covert locations. So yes, the devices are kept out of sight because use of these devices is already illegal, and the people that were using these to basically torture people and strip them of their rights, and to do so in a conspiratorial way. And what I mean by that is several people conspire together. Those are very serious crimes, and so the perpetrators can't just run down the street with their transmitters, openly visible to people. These have to be done covertly, and there's a variety of ways that these things can be concealed. One thing I think that anyone interested in exploring this topic further should look into through-the-wall radar. These systems are essentially, we believe that these systems are what is used to assist the targeting. And now through-the-wall radar is an emerging technology that is already in use by fire departments. People with electrical engineering degrees can build these devices themselves. And so if you have two people in adjacent units in a high-rise building, and the people in one unit want to attack or harass the neighbor, they can use through-the-wall radar devices to localize that person. The fancy versions of these things can actually even pick up the heartbeat. They're used by fire departments to find victims that are still alive in burning buildings. And if the signals are passing through walls and concrete and so forth, they're also similar to an X-ray scanner in an airport. They're passing through people's clothing and through their body as well. So you can target someone with these systems, and then you can use different systems to send attack signals, basically. And the U.S. military has a demonstrated very large interest in these directed energy technologies, and I believe that the idea of using this, and maybe even some of the technologies, have leaked into the hands of people with connections to law enforcement or military, and then they realize they have the perfect weapon to run organized crime in a variety of different ways, because there's no accountability. There's very little forensic evidence. And right now, the officials in the know won't even acknowledge this problem. That is a huge, huge issue, because it opens the door. It gives criminals a pass to engage in this activity. And the problem is growing rapidly.
Sounds like, I know that to be a fact. I just heard it said that, there's all this plausible deniability, the whole idea behind targeting, and targeted individuals is that there's a built-in plausible deniability, and when people go to law enforcement or to some of the agencies or the FBI or even to their family and friends, the appropriate response I think everyone's trying to get is, support. And what happens, that's very rarely ever the case. I know, people end up in institutions, you go around saying you're hearing voices, but meanwhile, there's so many valid things out there to prove that this technology exists when it's being used in a more socially acceptable way. Like in Japan, when you lay your head on a window and only you hear the advertisement, it's through bone conduction. So there's little traces of the truth out there. People just need to be able to tie it together to understand what's going on. And then if you're in your house and you're like, I'm getting hurt in my home, I'm feeling pain and whatever the case may be, again, it sounds crazy. One of the first things I think they try to do in these programs is make the person appear mentally unstable. That's like the first step, and it seems to be across the board with people. It just is very discrediting, and it's just a shame too, because you really are looking for support, and and it's such a horrific crime, and that should be the case, but instead it's the opposite reaction, and it's just such an isolating experience.
That's for sure. The victims are what the activism community is pushing for at present is just an acknowledgement that this is a criminal problem of very large magnitude. We just want recognition that the problem is real, because that would take away probably roughly half of the victimization. There's sort of two halves of the victimization. There's the physical torture and the assaults, and these assaults are as violating as rape, and they're extremely painful. So rape and torture are not inappropriate adjectives to use or descriptors to use to describe them. We call it electronic harassment. That is a euphemism. But the other half of the victimization is the effect that you get when you come forward, when you have the bravery to come forward and to say, this is happening to me. You run the risk of getting institutionalized just for leveling the allegation. In a mental hospital, friends and family, this is really hard to, it's hard to accept that something this horrific could be going on in our society for many people. And so you get this isolation where talking about this is like taboo and forbidden, and so it's very isolating, and that's half of the victimization right there. So we're pushing for public awareness and acknowledgement of this. But I think you just used the word. Did you just say deniability?
Plausible deniability.
Yeah, plausible deniability.
Yeah.
So the military-industrial complex has shown a documented interest in directed energy weapons for quite some time, and now they're deploying various kinds of directed energy weapons.
Yeah, I think since Reagan, the Star Wars, or some of Reagan's. I think that stems back, maybe even before Reagan.
Oh, even before then. The Russians were ahead on the curve. It was the microwave. It was the embassy attacks in Moscow with microwave signals that happened from the late 50s to the early 70s that got the Americans' attention, and I think started the Americans into this. But the interest has been there for a long time, and these things have been under development for a long time. And I really like this quote from Metz and Kievit, 1994. And these were officers in the military. Maybe Air Force. And they wrote a paper called The Revolution in Military Affairs and Conflict Short of War, published by the U.S. Army War College. Maybe they were Army, I guess. But anyway, this really encapsulates a lot about what directed energy weapons, like the essence of directed energy weapons. They say, quote, "The advantage of directed energy weapons over conventional ones is deniability." Mm-hmm. Against whom is such deniability aimed? Certainly not the narco traffickers. They were using Central American narco trafficking as their example. So they continue. Against whom is this deniability aimed? Certainly not the narco traffickers, who will quickly recognize that interception by the Drug Enforcement Agency or military planes leads to loss of their aircraft. Instead, deniability must be aimed at the American people, who do not sanction the imprisonment, much less the execution of individuals without a trial. And execution is how they will perceive it, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, they are correct in pointing out that there's deniability on every level. There's deniability that's intrinsically built into these weapons, and that's because to go back and restate, that's because the signals are silent, they're invisible, they do great harm, often without leaving very many forensic traces at all. Sometimes they can do great harm to a person without even leaving lesions on their body. And so deniability is definitely used by the perpetrators, but it can also be used by the relevant government institutions that because maybe they have their hands dirty on this. That is a possibility that a lot of people, I try to remain neutral on that because I try to take the middle path. But it's certainly possible that these directed energy the use of these weapons on people kind of got kickstarted by non-consensual weapons testing programs. Corrupt law enforcement often seems to be involved. And so the non-corrupt government may say, this is a huge can of worms. Not in my administration. We're not going to deal with this. Not while I'm, head of the FBI. So the deniability can happen on the part of the perpetrators and on the part of the institutions that are charged with protecting people's safety and rights. So it is a very, very tricky problem that we're dealing with.
And even these agencies, a lot of it, there's a lot, especially the term you hear so often these days is the deep state, and part of that is the military industrial part of this. It's trillions of dollars, the military industrial complex, sorry, I'm like Nicole today. It's just trillions of dollars, and they're very involved, and they have their hands in this shadow government with the agencies as well as the government. So it's really tough, and so they may have their hands tied because of that. You have trillions of dollars that are kind of tied into the whole defense spending. So,
well, I like to say at the very least at this point, the government, that's a very broad statement, but it's fair. It's fair to say it that way. The government is culpable of willfully neglecting this problem, despite the fact that U.S. citizens and the citizens of other respective countries like Canada and Europe and many other countries all over the world, the citizens of those countries are leveling complaints of these abuses. And so at the very, very least, the government is guilty of ignoring the problem because there is no way that they can be unaware that these problems are happening.
Yes, I
and then there's scenarios that are possible. And again, I like to stay neutral on this. I get criticism for remaining neutral on this, but it's hard to know. But there's a lot of possible ways that the government could be further culpable, and that is through testing programs. Many targets don't have any reason to have been targeted. They seem to have been chosen at random, and then their targeting goes on for decades. Yes, this targeting stuff has been going on for a few decades. It has picked up recently, which is why we're having this conversation, and many people are having conversations. But so that's hard to explain from like a traditional criminal standpoint, how someone could be targeted for so long. And so, yes, I take note of that. We want investigations as to why this is going on. There's only the two best explanations for that are, number one, it is some kind of a testing program that continues on, and number two is that the people that engage in this are really, really sick and kind of do it for fun. Just to sadistically torture people on and on for some kind of sick enjoyment or something similar to that. It's hard to know how deep this goes, how deep the government's guilt on this goes.
A lot of people believe this is human experimentation. And, there was a program, the MK Ultra program, it was in the 60s, and people found out about it in Congress. We went to Congress, and It was the church hearings, and supposedly the MK Ultra was disbanded, and that human experimentation program was no longer supposed to be existing. So there's a thought that this is just a continuation of MK Ultra, and it has various names like Naomi and all these various names that are being used that kind of mirror the MK Ultra model.
So to me, MK Ultra and other non-consensual testing that is in the history of our glorious country are very relevant because our country sadly does have a history of doing non-consensual testing, like the Tuskegee experiments, where they gave people syphilis and then did not treat them, and syphilis is contagious. So that, I mean, and MK Ultra, where they, it seems from the documents that were saved and disclosed, that they were heavily into testing very strong hallucinogens on people. And
listeners, let me just interject something real quick. And for the listeners, these aren't conspiracy theories. These are facts. You can go on and read about MK Ultra. You can read about the church hearings. You can read about COINTELPRO, which is a possible element that goes into this. And the experiments, I thought they were the Tuskegee, but you probably pronounced it better than me. These are real, and they're available for online for human consumption. And these are not conspiracy theories. Nothing I'll be talking about is a conspiracy theory, so to speak. You know, a lot of this information is just kept quiet, and is on the verge of being exposed. So that's what I'm here for, and that's why Matthew's here to teach you, you know, non-TIs. TI is a term we use, targeted individuals, and then they just say they would say TI. It's just a shortened version. So whenever you hear us say TI, we're talking about targeted individuals. So sorry to interrupt there. I'll hand it back to you, Matthew.
No, that's fine. Let's go back a little bit to talking about other possible motives behind these pervasive crimes that are happening all over the place. And I have a story to tell that might be enlightening as to some possible motives in my case. And I don't really regard myself as a whistleblower in a traditional sense, because whistleblowers often are like lone wolf or acting in small groups. But I guess I'm part of a larger effort of activists that is trying to blow the whistle on something. And we regard it as very important work because, quite frankly, if unchecked, this kind of terror-driven, these are terror campaigns. These are this is like crimes of vigilantism and terror that are way, way bigger than the Ku Klux Klan at its biggest. It's already way bigger. This, if unchecked, this kind of activity will grow until it really, really destabilizes society. And then you know, we're trying to basically say action now will save a lot of pain and suffering and a lot of money by the government. But so I'm not really, I'm part of this like whistleblowing effort rather than being like what someone might think of as a traditional whistleblower who has information and documentation and comes forward on their own. I'm kind of trying to come forward in a group of people. But there's another element to my story that's a little bit like whistleblowing, and I'd like to get into that a little bit.
Okay, well, go ahead.
Okay, so I might ramble on here, but I want to make this a discussion. But so before I tell the details of that, let's talk about what could be some of the other motives behind crimes like this. I mean, in my view, a likely scenario is that these high-tech toys and ideas of using microwave weapons and anti-personnel weapons and similar weapons, voice-to-skull weapons, which the U.S. Army has a documented interest in. Maybe they've been deployed, and we just don't know that. And soldiers returning from war might have known about this, and maybe the police, know about this on some level. And then the availability of these and the ability to kind of use them on the side is just such a great temptation because there's essentially no chance of getting caught. And then I feel like it spills over into corruption and organized crime on the side that is now no longer really a government program. It's actually legitimate organized crime. And that has a whole series of possible motives, money-making motives. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, again, I think it's, I do think the deep state's involved on some level. I do think that these weapons aren't that complicated. Some are. There's very advanced versions of these weapons. There's very advanced technology, period, that the government has its hands on and that they've helped create. So, I think that, deep state's involved. I think, corporations, from what I understand, might be involved, hiring private investigators that maybe have these security clearances that can do these type of things. I was talking to one the other day, and this is just, hearsay. She was telling me that she once was talking with a private investigator, and he said to her, if you want to make someone's life miserable for the rest of their lives, get in contact with me. And that it was probably $100,000. I think she said something like that. And I've heard that a lot. So I think it's various people. I've talked to people I talked to a gentleman, he'd been a drug dealer. The drug cartel had their hands on some of this. I mean, these weapons are around, and I get upset when people say, it's only the government, it's only this, because I've talked to enough people and I've seen enough evidence and experienced things. So I definitely believe it's not just one, group of people. And I think there's training grounds, like in your case, you didn't do anything to anybody. You happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, and then there's people, I've talked to wives that are going through divorces and the husbands pay someone to do this to them, make them look crazy to get the kids or whatever the case may be. So there's, revenge, there's, ways of controlling people. People, I hear lawyers come to me and say they're targeted for taking on corporations or, I've talked to a lot of people about this. So, so I think it's a broad spectrum of groups and people that are doing this. So.
Right. So just thinking about the different, so it's like the ideas behind these technologies, which can be recapitulated by electrical engineers using essentially off-the-shelf hardware. We live in a wireless world, and there's all kinds of, transmitters, and there's even, as there's even companies on the clear web that sell radio frequency harassment devices. That just suggests that what's on the dark internet, there must be marketplaces of these things.
Yeah.
And once the idea is out there, it's like the genie is out of the bottle. And so let's say you are a drug distribution gang, and you need muscle for your drug distribution. Your distributors, sometimes they don't pay to resupply. Okay, so what do you do when a distributor doesn't pay to resupply? Do you go break their arm, right? Or you go break their jaw? Well, that leaves forensic evidence, right? People don't generally break their own jaw. Well, a better way to coerce someone or to punish them would be to use directed energy weapons, which are essentially tantamount to severe physical torture, and there's almost nothing you can do to defend yourself from these public attacks that can come from anywhere. And that leaves no forensic evidence. And if the victim complains about it, they actually harm themselves more because they get sent down that pathway of psychiatric hold or psychiatric incarceration. So if the idea is spilling out, I think organized crime groups or the criminal elite, the financial elite, corporations, security companies, can think of many ways of making money off these things. And until we get really good disclosures from quote unquote whistleblowers that were part of these crime groups, it'll be hard to know. But you can think of many, like I imagine that there's harassment for hire services. pay us $100,000 and we will destroy someone's life for you. There's probably a lot of people that would pay that to destroy the life of their ex-spouse. They want custody of their kids. Make sure their spouse gets put into a psychiatric hospital. Instant custody of kids, no questions asked. These are speculations, but we're starting to get bits and pieces of revelations that are pointing in these directions. Corporate espionage using through-wall radar and corporate rivalry. Corporations have a lot of money. I think in general, hiring these systems probably does cost a lot of money. In my case, yes, I happened to move into the wrong apartment, which I think. I will wait for validation of my evidence, but I tore some evidence out of the walls that hopefully one day will get validated. But it's very, very unusual evidence, which I think you've seen the documentation of that. I've put videos on YouTube under Dr. Matthew Aaron. I titled the video "Microwave Emitting Drywall," and I'm confident that there's something going on with that. But I basically think that my apartment was pre-rigged with harassment devices, electromagnetic harassment devices that were basically hidden all throughout my apartment. And they switched that on a few times. And I had no choice. I had to flee the apartment. My own apartment, I had to flee out of there. Why do I think that apartment was pre-rigged? Well, it was right across the alley from that non-residential building that was full of people partying all hours of the night, spying on people, doing visible illumination and probably radio frequency harassment of all different residents in Vancouver. And then I was getting all of that electronic harassment at a low level. And then I confronted them. I didn't realize how dangerous they were. I confronted them. And then I think the motive behind them, they basically revealed the harassment network to me at that point. Once I was targeted, people were coming out of the woodwork. I couldn't go anywhere in Vancouver without being assaulted by these things. Even police started to participate in ways that are hard to prove, but in ways that I've never experienced before, like harassment skits that would happen, that the police would be involved in, that would happen minutes after I was assaulted with these devices, which, by the way, left beam traces in my window. I also posted that evidence to YouTube. Under my name, Dr. Matthew Aaron, my alias that I'm using. So anyway,
I really like that. Go ahead.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was just going to say that was very convincing evidence. I really enjoyed that video, and I think it's a very important piece of documentation.
Yeah. Some people have claimed that those marks on my window were from suction cups, but I can tell you that I have additional pieces of evidence, and that is I never saw those marks before the assaults that happened right at the two spots where I was standing next to my window and got smoked by some kind of beam right through the window, and also the same mark was burned into my visual field. If anyone's ever used an arc welder, if you look at an arc welder while it's going without a protective goggles, you'll get photopigment bleaching in your visual field, and for quite a long time after, you can see the electrode. I'm not sure that's what they call it, or the rod that's used in arc welding, the carbon rod. You can see that arc in your visual field. Well, in my visual field after that assault, where I was looking back at this beam weapon type device, that same concentric circular grill mark that was on my window was also burned into my visual field for 24 hours. I tried to go to an ophthalmologist, but the doctor that I tried to get that referral to did not like the fact that I was alleging that a microwave attack had left that burn in my visual field. So in my case, just checking in. Are you still there, Ella?
Sure, I'm right here. I just put myself on mute to kind of keep the background noise at bay.
Oh, okay. When that's what it is. When you put yourself on mute, the background noise goes away. Okay, that's fine. Thanks.
You're
So
welcome.
the motive switched from me being yet another tenant in this pre-rigged apartment, which, by the way, I came to find out all the previous tenants in my apartment had only stayed for a very short period of time before moving out. One of the tenants prior to me had also done damage to the apartment. These are not proof of anything, but they are consistent with them also being harassed from those psychopaths across the alley. And then the motive switched when I started taking a stand. The motive switched to amping up the attacks to drive me away from the area permanently. And that's when they started using the anti-personnel weapon systems on me, the more powerful weapon systems. And that's exactly like what the active denial system is designed for, to repel people from areas, because even the strongest and toughest Marine cannot stand to be in the beam of the active denial system for more than a couple of seconds.
And you can see that when you're watching the news, they show it being used against protests or groups of people that are considered problematic. So that's something we've all seen on television.
Right. Well, I don't think they've ever used the active denial system on protesters. I think they've used the LRAD,
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah,
the long range acoustic device. But the idea, they're both directed energy weapons. And what we're talking about, and I think what most targets are dealing with, are like smaller, more compact versions of these larger devices. But we don't have very good answers about the technology, so I don't like to spend too much time talking about it. We need help to figure that out. But let me make a disclosure that I've never made before. But if we have the time, it involves me kind of dipping down into my story in a higher resolution for about 10 or 15 minutes, if that's okay. Okay, so once the heavy targeting started, where it was extreme pain, extreme induced muscle trembling, flashes of electric pain, lesions being left on my body, attacks coming through the concrete slab from the apartment directly above mine and out on the street from unknown sources. Once that started, it was intense, and it involved a lot of people. I didn't have a car when I lived in Vancouver, so because Vancouver is a very walkable city, and I was living right downtown and working downtown, so I was a pedestrian out on the street a lot, and a sitting duck to these kinds of attacks. Probably, I'm going to guess, probably from devices that may have been mounted in vans and trucks, in addition to possibly smaller generators and transmitters that people carried around with batteries and aimed at me, which sometimes by themselves don't really hurt that much, but when a bunch of people, like a pack of wild dogs, are slowly following you around with these things, it's very uncomfortable and very painful.
It sounds like a horror movie. It really does.
Yeah, it is. It's like it's like the zombies come out after you. It's really, you really go down a rabbit hole. But when this first started to happen, the first time I was mobbed on the street, in this, like, you can't run around like a frantic person.
Here we go. We'll come back, Matthew, right after this break.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention? I've just been handed an urgent news story, and I need all of you to stop what you're doing and listen.
On the go? Still want to listen? Don't have one of those fancy phones with too many buttons? Don't know what an app is? Or you don't even care? Well, we got you here at Revolution Radio. Now you can dial in 24/7 to listen to our shows. We have a number for Studio A and Studio B, and best of all, it's free. Don't forget, your carrier charges for your cell phone provider may apply, though, so check with your cell provider to make sure. So ready? Here you go. Get a pen. Here's the number. Studio A is 712-432-6958, and Studio B is 716-748-0112. Thank you very much for listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the number one listener-supported radio station in the world.
Hey everyone, it's Barbara Jean Lindsay, the Cosmic Oracle. If you have questions about your past lives or future plans, need answers from the cosmos about your love life or career, or just want to keep your finger on the pulse of the planet, check out my show, The Cosmic Oracle, here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
Most guys freeze. That's your cerebral cortex looking for an answer it doesn't have.
See? Even your brain knows you're screwed.
The body's filling with adrenaline right now, whether you know it or not. Your heart's beating fast. It's getting a little harder to breathe. The neurobiological system is telling it to run, but your knees are too weak to move.
Fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It is a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. That is near insanity. And do not misunderstand me. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice. We are all telling ourselves a story.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. 100% listener-supported radio. Reporting to danger. Unafraid. Right here, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio.
Looking for a nightcap to fill your listening needs? Come join us on Spaced Out Radio with me, Dave Scott, right here on Revolution Radio. Monday through Friday for 3 hours a night, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, we will take you down the supernatural path. From ET contact to the paranormal and all of the spiritual, cryptid, and conspiracy stories in between. You can find us right here on Revolution Radio, at spacedoutradio.com, on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, and on Facebook at Spaced Out Radio Show. Spaced Out Radio. It's a night of talk and interaction. Are you experienced?
Join me weekdays for my new show, Tell Chris Joe. This is going to be a problem show brought to you live from Kensington. Thursdays, I'm dealing with hot topics, heated debate, what's new around the world, and ring-ins to discuss listeners' problems and offering considered and heartfelt solutions. So join me, Chris Hart, for Tell Chris Joe. Stop what you're doing, grab a cup of tea, and coming live from Kensington. Relax. Let me entertain you with a coffee bar online. Listeners' very personal problems. So that's Thursdays, 2 p.m. in the afternoon, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. See you there. It's going to be lots of fun.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Well, welcome back, listeners. Again, we're interviewing Dr. Matthew Aaron. He is a targeted individual, and he's introducing this topic to our listeners. And anyways, I'll go back to you, Matthew.
Thanks, Ella. I was just trying to tell a portion of my story of what happened to me up in Vancouver, Canada, because it's suggestive of maybe some whistleblowing connections that I can make about Vancouver to a limited extent. Everything needs to be taken with a grain of salt because I don't have documentation, but the story is suggestive. And what I was describing to you was this transition from the low-level harassment and the low-level electronic harassment and surveillance. Then there was this confrontation that I did with the people across the alley because I saw them projecting photographs that they had taken of people in the privacy of their own home. It was very offensive to me, and they were constantly harassing and watching me. So I confronted them, and then there was this shift where the assaults became just that. They became electronic assaults, very, very painful, sometimes potentially life-threatening. And the first time, initially when these attacks happened into my apartment, I would run out of my apartment. Okay, I did that a few times, and in one case, I ran out of my apartment. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. This was one of the attacks that left one of those very unusual beam marks in my window, a permanent beam mark in my window. I don't have access to the glass anymore, but I took video recordings of it. They're online. You can search for them on Dr. Matthew Aaron, targeted individual, or beam mark. And I ran into a donut shop that was in the same in the footprint or in the ground floor of the building right across the alley. Not part of that non-residential building, but just attached to it at the bottom. And I wanted to be in a space with bystanders. I felt safer there. Certainly, my apartment was being assaulted by these dangerous beams or fields of electromagnetic radiation. So I ran in there. I quickly linked up with some people who had been out partying all night. Total bystanders, very friendly. I sat at their table and we started talking. And moments after I joined their table, the young woman that I was talking to said, "Look over there. What's that person doing?" And there was a person who looked completely clean shaven, a South Asian person who was hunched over, slumped over onto the table. And I can't remember if he was there or not when I went in. But it makes more sense that he wasn't given what, but I can't remember for sure. Anyway, a few minutes later, a uniformed Vancouver police officer came in and walked up to that person who looked to be passed out at the table, although was looking completely fresh and showered, not like they'd been up all night, certainly not like a homeless person, and started shaking their shoulder. And the person on the table did not move at all. So the Vancouver police officer spoke into his radio. It was inaudible. It might have been just moving his lips without actually speaking, and continued to try to wake this person up. Several minutes later, 4 Vancouver police officers came in. This was in Brecca Bakery and Cafe on Davie and Hornby Street. And they started crowding around. Like it was like they were kind of pretending that they were getting donuts, but they were also kind of, I couldn't tell. It almost, the impression I got is that they were called for backup because of this person that was passed out at the table. And then one of the perpetrators from the 1190 Hornby Street, that medical building across the alley from me, appeared outside the bakery. And it was dark at this time. This was in the winter. This was December of 2015. And the woman that I was speaking to said, look outside. This is so weird. Do you know that person? That lady outside is like trying to get your attention. She looks like, I don't know, she looks like she's acting really aggressively. And that is what she was doing. She was trying to get me to come outside. And I just ignored her. And then eventually she came inside in front of all these police officers, walked up to me, and she said, "So?" And I was like, do I know you? Of course, I did recognize her from that building, but I'm right in front of the cops. I wanted to diffuse the situation. So I said, "I think you have me confused with someone else." And she's like, "No, I think you know me." And I was like, I mean, this is audibly within feet away from 4 uniformed Vancouver police officers. And I said, "No, I don't know you. You have me confused with someone else." And again, I did recognize her as one of the after-hours occupants in that building across the alley. And I left with those young people that I had hooked up with. And just as I was walking out, I saw the person at the table jump to his feet, and he was like maybe a 30-year-old South Asian guy, and he shrugged his shoulders at the main cop that had been tapping him on the shoulder. He had a smile on his face, and he just jumped up into a fully alert position, and then I was out of there. Okay, and that happened minutes after I was essentially electrocuted with one of those beam weapons. Okay, now, the next day, an all-day mob attack happened in which it was the first time that no matter where I walked in the city, these beams of energy were coming from who knows where. I had the impression that some people were carrying devices around. Other people were firing them at me from cars. I can't say for sure, but it was wherever I went. And if I went fast and to a different destination, there would be like a 5 or 10 minute delay when I went, took the bus to a McDonald's or a taxi cab here. There would be a 5 to 15 minute delay, and then it would start up again. It felt like I was being followed, and that I had limited ability to temporarily outpace this slow moving assault. Okay, so anyway, that went on all day. All day. I was radiated all day, 12 hours or 8 hours, nonstop. And I finally made a plan to go to my friend's, a friend of a friend's pizza restaurant called Corduroy on Cornwall Avenue. And I went into that restaurant right when it opened. And I mean, it went from being no customers to completely full in the 5 minutes after I walked in there. And there were beams going everywhere. And I even could tell that the person I was talking to, trying to get advice on what to do, she was getting hit. And I said, "Can't you feel that?" And she just had a terrified look on her face. But there was one time when a beam went passing through our bodies. You could feel it passing through my body in the direction of her. And we both had this like involuntary, our entire upper bodies lurched at the exact same time. And then I said, "Did you feel that?" And she said, "Yes, I did. I felt it." And a few minutes after that, her husband came and said to me, "Matt, you're scaring the customers. You have to leave." So I said, "Okay, can I go out the back?" And he's like, "Yeah, okay, you can go out the back." So I went out the back, and I hid in the small alleyway behind the restaurant for as long as I could. I mean, I wanted to just hide there for like hours, basically, until the people following me had dispersed. But then after about 20 minutes, I heard voices and footsteps coming down this dark alley. This was basically just a walkway. I saw a car pull up ahead of me. I was by these bushes near the end of this walkway, and there was another gravel alley, and a car pulled in, and just idled there. And then right after that, I heard footsteps and voices approaching me from the other side saying like, you know, he's over here. He's over here. Go this way. And I just burst out of there, running at full speed. I ran through Kitsilano. I was, it was near Christmas Eve, a couple days before Christmas Eve. It was around 7 p.m. No one was on the streets, and I'm running, and a small 4-door passenger vehicle and a delivery truck were slowly shadowing me as I was running through this completely empty neighborhood. And at one point, the delivery truck went around a roundabout that I had just run through, and so that the back of the truck was pointing towards me. I mean, I wasn't looking behind me very much, but I looked behind me enough to see that happened, and I'm running down the road, and then all of a sudden, bam, wham! No sound was made, but my entire body from head to toe was electrified, and it caused me to fall to the ground. All my muscles stopped working, and I later described it as the feeling was like I was tased right through the air. And it hit me twice. One. I fell to the ground. I got up, started running. A few seconds later, a second hit. So, I mean, I was running. I was in sheer terror at this point. Both times that I got hit that way, I let out a scream reflexively. I'm a pretty brave person. I'm not. I don't scare easily. I'm a fairly tough person. I've done a lot of field work in Central Africa. I've gone through many, dangerous and terrifying. I am not a pushover by any means. But when these things hit me, I could not help letting out like a scream completely reflexively, as if my body was being torn apart by wild animals. It was just sheer pain and terror. And I kept running. I got back up. I kept running, and I ran to Vanier Park. And as I entered Vanier Park, the vehicles that had been following me parked in the Maritime Museum of Canada or Vancouver, the Maritime Museum parking lot. And then I decided, for a second, I thought I was going to go into the water because I wanted to get away from these guys. And for a split second, I about jumped into English Bay, and I was going to swim to the other side. It was December, though. But so I said, no, split second, I was like, no, bad idea. So I ran across the open glade, or it was like a grassy knoll, and I was running across there, and there's a giant sculpture there, an iron sculpture, massive. It's like 15 feet high. It's called the Gate to the Northwest Passage. And when I was a few steps away from that sculpture, they hit me again with that thing, which I presume was in the back of that delivery truck. And when they hit me that time, it was the most powerful hit that I got. It lasted less than a second, but it completely electrified my entire body. It was incredibly painful. I completely flew forward with my forward momentum. I flew forward through the air into the mud. If anyone has children listening right now, you might want to put it on mute or cover their ears. Just I don't mind saying this. It's a medical thing, but the amount of energy entering my body was so much that I automatically ejaculated at the instant that energy was surging through my body. Now, that is not something that anyone can do while running in terror at a full pace. That's just that is like proof that there was a outside energy source. I mean, no one with a delusion could do that, I believe. So anyway, I was close to that sculpture, and I scrambled behind the sculpture. After I regained control of my body, I scrambled behind the sculpture, and the sculpture is made out of iron. And then over the course of the next few minutes, I felt pulses of of electricity surging through the ground and the sculpture. And I think the sculpture was shielding me, but the bursts of energy were causing this induced current. And I could feel it. It felt like the entire ground was like a 9-volt battery sort of applied to your tongue in bursts, one after the other. So I think they were trying to hit me more times, but I was shielded at that point. And that is consistent with a microwave assault too, because large slabs of iron that are grounded will shield you from microwave beams. And I think that's what was happening. Now, I saw people in the distance on the grassy knoll where I had just run through. There was no one there. So I believe that people had exited their vehicles and they were in the distance. It was at night. They were in the distance, and I could not see their faces, but I had just run through there and there was no one there. So I presume that they had exited the vehicles, and I was scared. I thought I was going to be killed that time. So I started screaming for the police. I couldn't get to my phone. I had just crashed to the ground. All my belongings had crashed out of my pockets and stuff, and I think my phone was in my jacket pocket at the time. I couldn't get to my phone. I started screaming at the top of my lungs for police. For 90 minutes, I was pinned down there. 90 minutes. Finally, one of the people who was standing in the distance came running down the hill and did that deniability thing and said, "Are you okay? Do you need the police? Do you want me to call the police for you?" And I didn't know what to do. I kind of suspected this person was involved in it. Like, why are you waiting in the distance when someone is screaming for their life? I said, "Yes, call the police, get the police." And the police with some EMTs arrived presently after another. It was an hour before that person came running down the grassy hill, and then it was another half an hour before the police came. I was keeping my head low the whole time, and in that intervening time, those vehicles left. Those people and those vehicles left. I was there alone, and then the EMTs and the police came. Well, wouldn't you know it, it was 2 undercover police officers from the Granville Downtown South CPC, Community Policing Center on Granville Street. And how do I know that? Well, they were police officers. They identified them as such. And they weren't wearing uniforms. And one of the officers was the same person who less than 2 days before had been pretending to be passed out at that table in Brecca Bakery and Cafe.
Wow.
Yep, and that is not something I am questionable about, that ID. And I'm gonna, for the sake of time, I'm gonna leave off another type of harassment skit that happened again moments after I was assaulted with these things. It was like the police were trying to entrap me into making a claim of directed energy. Now this time at the statue, the police came up to me and talking to me like, I'm a highly educated person and there is nothing wrong with my mental health. And that police officer came up and said, "Oh, hey, what's going on? What do you think happened to you tonight?" Talking to me like I was a child, asking me before I even was able to open my mouth, asking me, what do I think happened to me tonight? That it was so bizarre. So I said, I don't know. I don't really know, but I was hit by something like someone hit me with a taser right through the air. And then the police, I started to bend down to get my stuff, and the police said, "Don't worry about that. We're going to take care of that." And then the police officer was like, "Well, so to explain to me what happened." And I said, it was like I was tased right through the air, and the energy was so great that I ejaculated automatically. And then the 2 officers giggled to each other when I said that. It was extremely violating. After a few more minutes, the police officers were collecting my stuff, and then the emergency response vehicle pulled up, and I had hypothermia from being on the ground for 90 minutes in the winter with no coat, and they started treating me for hypothermia. They opened up a space blanket, one of those Mylar space blankets, and they put a heating pad on my shoulder, and this only happened for 30 seconds, they crowded around me, and my view was blocked for 30 seconds. And then when the blanket came down, the 2 officers were gone, leaving me they just left, leaving me no option to explain my story. And then the emergency technicians said, we're going to take you to St. Paul's Hospital to be checked out. And at that point, I can't really get into the details, but the emergency responders took me into their locker room, their like employee locker room, and other emergency medical technicians came in, and they crowded around me again for about an hour to 90 minutes. And during that time, they electronically assaulted me in their locker room. And I don't know the details of how they pulled that off, but I will tell you this: each emergency medical technician or paramedic, whatever you want to call them, had their utility shoes on, and on the tip of one shoe, just one shoe of each person, there was a little antenna type thing sticking off, about 1/4 to 1/2 inch sticking off. And the reason that my attention was drawn towards that is because as I was sitting there in their locker room with no explanation, of course, I was scared at that point. After seeing the same police officer and not knowing how big this conspiracy to conspire against people, using conspiracy in that sense of the word, not knowing how big and dangerous this was, I just kept my mouth shut. And they kept me there, and they did not, there was no explanation and no questioning at all. And I just said, well, I'm going to keep my mouth shut and see where this goes. And as I was sitting there, I felt the beams of energy that many targeted individuals can relate to cutting into my body, going into my body, into my internal organs, and sweeping through my body. And they were thin beams, like pencil thin beams. And you can sometimes get, with your eyes closed, even your eyes closed, actually it doesn't matter because you can't see the beam. You can get a sense for the angle of the beam, like dancing on your skin and cutting into your body and then sweeping off. And the angle of this seemed to be coming from near the floor. And that's what drew my attention to their shoes. And then I noticed that the movement of their shoes, they were kept switching positions in this crazy kind of like, it was a surreal experience where they were crowding around me, and they kept switching position and talking in this highly animated way, sort of like I'm doing now because I'm trying to get through this story in time. But basically, my attention was drawn to their shoes because of the trajectory of these painful energy beams going into my body, and so I believe that that the assault was carried out that way. And later, a few weeks later, I saw someone on the street doing the same thing with their shoe, aiming their shoe at me. And they also had like a little nub or an emitter or an antenna on there. It was the same exact kind of shoe as those paramedics were wearing. Now, to bring this story to a close, to get back to your original topic, the whistleblower topic. Now, here's where I want to bring some pieces together. Oh, by the way, I was placed on a psychiatric hold at the hospital. Eventually, the paramedics eventually tired. I didn't say anything. They were inflicting pain on me with these devices. I didn't say anything. They were talking about their other cases of helping people, talking basically inappropriate talk in front of me. I was in their locker room, and they were saying, yeah, that person was really weird. We were trying to help that lady. She was all flipped out. I'm never going to forget that lady. And I could tell that that was the nature of their talk over the whole hour to hour and a half period. And I could tell that they were on the verge of dispersing. I mean, I don't know how they had an hour and a half to sit there in their locker room, essentially torturing someone that they just brought in. But then out of the blue, without saying anything else, I could tell they were about to disperse. And I said to those paramedics, who I hope can listen to this recording, I said, I'll bet none of you are ever going to forget me. And one of the guys, the tall, lanky guy, said, you got that right, bud. We're never going to forget you. And then they went on their way. And then I was placed into a psychiatric hold for 2 weeks. Actually, I was placed on an indefinite psychiatric hold, and I put in an appeal to appeal my hold. It took 4 days for me to see any psychiatrist. The psychiatrist looked scared when they came in to talk to me. I was completely fine. There was no further electronic harassment in the hospital is St. Paul's Hospital. And I was in the psychiatric hold. And the psychiatrist took 4 days to see me. And the topic of what brought me in there didn't even come up at all. It was such a surreal experience. I actually didn't even bring it up either. And it was just like, you guys aren't even going to ask me what the circumstances were that brought me in here. So anyway, I put my appeal papers in. The day I had not a court case, but an appeal case by the hospital administration, I guess, the review board. My case was assigned, and on the morning of my hearing, I was released without explanation. And so because of that, I could never speak to that board. Now, tying these loose ends together, some of the staff inside the hospital were very professional to me. I think this could be going on without them even knowing. The psychiatrist who first spoke to me looked really scared, like she might have had an inkling of the major abuses that are going on. But one of the nurses was very nice, and she goes, when I was getting my stuff, she goes, I can't believe you came in here with the binoculars. And I said to her, yeah, I said, there were some really bad people in an organized crime group that were after me. I needed those binoculars because I was on the run. And she's like, oh, that's crazy. That's a crazy story. That's a wild story. Who were these people? And I said, well, do you know 1190 Hornby Street? It's right across the alley from my building. That's the focal point of all this. And she goes, oh, that's weird. That's where the HR department of our hospital is located. So the HR department of Providence Healthcare is located in 1190 Hornby Street. Also, Providence Healthcare Research Institute is located in 1190 Hornby Street. This is the non-residential building right across the street from right across the alley from my apartment, where I see all that activity at night, the drug-fueled parties, the harassment of other people, the people in camouflage spying on people. All this activity is going on there. And then it occurred to me that one possible motive, this is just conjecture, one possible money-making motive could be, let's keep those beds full in the psychiatric unit, because in Canada, the province, British Columbia, pays medical bills. So basically, if the hospital is keeping their psych hold units full, and that's why I got released, because new patients were coming in, if they keep those beds full, what do you think a 2-week psych hold is worth in a hospital? It doesn't require any fancy procedures. It just requires meds and a bed, and I'm sure they make, $1,500 a night at least, times 14. Keep those beds full. They're group rooms. It's just a conjecture, and I want to put that one out there, because if officials start to really investigate where these electronic harassment networks, it's large organized crime, and I will encourage British Columbia officials, including the Attorney General, who
we lost the server. Well, let me hang it up. Now the server's back. Let me try and get Matthew again. But you're still live.
Yeah. Can they still hear me right now?
Yeah, you're still live.
Yeah, well, while we're waiting for the technical issues to work themselves out with the mic. Hi, Matthew.
Did I say something too controversial?
Maybe, you just never know. Not at all. You're just go on with your story. I guess it was just a technical hiccup. There's issues with Skype.
Okay, I'm not trying to be. I'm trying to. I thought maybe I had said something that crossed a line of what I can say.
Not with the station.
Okay, so where were we in the story?
Oh gosh, No, that's a good question. You were just talking about, I don't remember precisely, honestly.
Well, did I tell you that I was placed on a psychiatric hold?
Yes, you just started to tell us about that, yes.
Okay, after the paramedics at Providence Healthcare, paramedics had electronically harassed me in their locker room.
Yes.
Okay, so what the last point that I wanted to make is that I was in the St. Paul's Hospital on a psychiatric hold, and it took 4 days for a psychiatrist to see me, and she looked very scared when she talked to me. She did not ask me a single question about the circumstances that had brought me in. I can't say that that's evidence of anything, but it was a very weird thing because I thought for sure that the conversation of what had brought me in there would have been a topic of conversation. Not to mention, she looked frightened, and I was completely fine. I was calm, polite, lucid. I mean, it must have been bizarre to her to see someone like me sitting in front of her. And so I put in my papers for an appeal. This is an appeal run by, I think, a board of people where you can contest your psychiatric hold. I put papers in for that. I was scheduled an appeal hearing after 2 weeks. It happened after 2 weeks, and I have to say that during my time in the hospital, I got professional treatment, although the response from that one psychiatrist was bizarre. I was treated professionally. I was not harassed, or no pain was inflicted upon me. They treated me well within the hospital. The hospital staff may not be involved in this. Basically, the criminal harassment network may have infiltrated positions right up to essentially the gateway to the hospital. But I put in for my appeal, and the morning that my appeal hearing was scheduled, I was released without explanation. And that morning, let me check and see if you're still there. Okay.
I'm still here.
Okay. That morning, the nurse that, so because I was released, and therefore my case, my hearing by fiat was canceled. Obviously, I wanted to be released, so I'm not going to contest that. So basically, it's a way for them to get out of having a hearing. I was released with no explanation. The day before, it was as if they were going to keep me there indefinitely. The next day, the morning of my case, released, no explanation. So,
and also we should go back. You've never been hospitalized before for mental issues. You're educated, you're intelligent, you have an academic background. So this is not normal for you to end up in these type of
right.
hospitals.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, in all fairness, I've had bouts of situational depression during crisis situations in my life, in all fairness, right?
Like most people.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm going to give props to myself. I'm honest enough to disclose that. But never had been hospitalized before. It was a new experience for me. So one of the really friendly nurses in the 8C ward, the fancy ward. I was first in the not so nice ward for part of the time, and then I was put up into the fancier ward after a few days. And the nice blonde nurse there said, she was giving me my stuff, and she was laughing. She was very friendly, and she goes, "I can't believe you came in here with binoculars." And I said, "Yeah, I had binoculars." I said, "I was on the run from some serious criminals that were basically chasing me all around town." And then she said something like, "Oh, well, where were these criminals located? Or do you know where they were?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah, they were from 1190 Hornby Street. There's some really bad people who do a lot of harassment and really hurt a lot of people in Vancouver, located in 1190 Hornby Street." And when I got cut off, I thought I got cut off because I gave that information. But I guess this is Whistleblower Nation after all. Now, this nurse then said to me, "Oh, really? The HR department for us is in 1190 Hornby Street. So the HR department for Providence Healthcare is in the building right across the alley where I saw all this harassment activity, stalker training activity, surveillance activity, and quite frankly, these like drug-fueled all-night parties that I think were used to reward the stalkers. That's 1190 Hornby Street, in addition to other property management businesses. But they're located there, they're big, and so is the Providence Healthcare Research Institute. And Providence Healthcare runs the hospital, the psychiatric ward, and the ambulance service. So I would like to offer a possibility for federal officials to consider. The Attorney General of Canada, who I contacted, should consider this. Other people should consider this. That one possible motive is that this harassment network, it might be engaged in a lot of different racketeering activity, but they might have a system all worked out to keep those hospital beds full in the psych ward of the hospital. Because what do you think a 2-week psychiatric hold is worth? By the way, in British Columbia and in Canada in general, it is the government that compensates the hospital for those kinds of situations. Your government healthcare pays the hospital. So if officials start to take this seriously, they should consider how these harassment networks might be defrauding government and taxpayers of their money, because a 2-week psych hold is probably gravy for the hospital. No fancy procedures. It just requires medications. I was only in front of a psychiatrist for 3 brief times in that 2-week period. So basically, it was like I was just given a shared room. And what do you think that the government? I mean, what do you think the hospital charges the government? $1,500 a night at the least. Could be more. Could be $5,000 or $10,000 a night for a 2-week psych hold. It probably costs a lot of money.
Yeah, that's a topic I'm going to definitely have some discussions about. That's something that needs to be exposed. Just this greedy corruption of these not just the mental health, but our health systems. So, anyways, go back.
Well, the last thing I want to say is that I don't. This could be done as just one possibility. There's all kinds of other racketeering, as I gave earlier, the example with drug dealers and the muscle of drug dealers, harassment for hire, et cetera, et cetera. There could be all kinds of racketeering going on that are associated with these crimes of organized stalking and electronic harassment. Corrupt police. There are examples of corrupt police who are involved in these activities. That is my allegation, and that is the allegation of many other people. And there's many people who even have documentation of that kind of harassment from police that's associated with this. But I would like to say, in all fairness, that many of the hospital staff and even some of the psychiatrists, these crimes can be done so covertly that it does not mean that everyone in the hospital is in on it. It might just be some corrupt elements in the hospital administration, and of course the paramedics. I point my finger at them, and I have no doubt that many of those paramedics have been recruited into this. But as I think Bill Binney said on one of your calls, in these harassment networks, they can be highly compartmentalized. And to quote Bill Binney, I believe, or maybe it was Kirk Wiebe, the lie can be different at every level. So even many of the people in the middle of this, kind of in the middle of this, might not be aware of what's really going on. I'll stop there, Ella, because I don't want to take up your whole call. Sorry for rambling on with my story for so long, but it has a lot of details associated with it.
No, I mean, not at all. It's a very compelling story. It's fascinating. It's scary. It's a horrific experience. And, we as citizens need to spread the word about these crimes. I think the only thing that's going to work, because things have been done to try to stop these type of crimes in the past, is we need to get out and spread the word. It's going to have to be the people pushing Congress to have a hearing. That's what's got to happen. And the only way is to, have these discussions, to have these podcasts, the news get some articles written about it, some documentaries, and just get credible people, because there are people that are hired to kind of discredit a community as well. So, but
and once again, I want to remind the listeners that don't forget about this unfolding situation in Cuba. They called it sonic weapons, but I think that might be a smokescreen for what I believe essentially the same kinds of microwave weapons might have been used, because the advantage of microwave weapons over the sonic weapons is that they can pass right through walls, whereas the sonic weapons can be blocked. But anyway, yes, activism is great. I know you do a lot for that.
Yeah, I just think it's really important, but to the non-TIs, if they want to have that conversation, I think it is scary. It's a very scary thing to discuss with people, but, it's happening and it's increasing, so we've got to get a handle on the situation. What are your thoughts, Matthew, on that? What do you think it's going to take to kind of get the ball rolling and expose this? We know firsthand that Bill Binney, America's greatest whistleblower, I just have so much respect for him. He's so noble. And, Edward Snowden's also very well known. And Edward Snowden would not have done what he did if it wasn't for Bill Binney. This is a very noble, great man, and he's really trying to take up the targeted individual cause, and he's working with some wonderful, wonderful people, doing a survey, trying to get the symptoms and try to make some conclusions. He's a data cruncher. That's what he did. And he was a high-level NSA employee, and definitely do your research, you guys, on Bill Binney. He's got a movie out called A Good American. He was in the Snowden movie, and he's also in Citizen 4, which is an excellent documentary. I recommend everybody see that. It's just our duty as citizens. We have to speak the truth. Even if we're standing alone, we need to speak the truth. So what about
you asked me what do I think this is going to take, and I think it's just going to take activism, grassroots activism on many levels, supplemented by maybe some big disclosures. And I believe this is actually as important as the civil rights movement. This is actually an issue that's way more important than people know, and I think it will emerge as the most important human rights and law enforcement and public safety issue of the 21st century. And I think we have exciting times ahead of us, but we also have a lot of hard work ahead of us.
I agree. I definitely do. But these things coming out, like the Cuban story, that's just kind of validating what's going on. So,
absolutely.
Okay, so I'm not sure how it works here, because this is my first show here. I don't know if we can end a little early. I'm not exactly sure how that goes. Do we have time for a question? Should we have a question? What do you think, Ahmad?
You have about 8 minutes.
About 8 minutes, huh? Okay, so if you want to ask Dr. Aaron a question or just would like to make a comment, you can give us a call at 229-299-5360, 229-299-5360. We'll take one more question and then we'll head on out.
Yeah, I'm sorry for taking up all the time. We got the timing a little off there. I wish we'd left more time for callers.
No, it's fine. Your story is, people need to know how violent these crimes are and how intricate they are. It's very bizarre sounding to people who are not targeted themselves. And I think in a lot of cases, at least, prior to what's going on right now, people wouldn't believe it unless it was happening to them, because it's so orchestrated in so many regards. So,
I have a question.
Sure.
Is there any way to block yourself from this type of harassment?
Ella, do you want to take that one first? And
I'll let you take that question.
Okay. Your name is Ahmad. Did I get that right?
A Mad Painter.
A Mad Painter. Okay.
Sorry about A Mad.
So, there are a variety of shielding materials, and one indicator that this is a growing problem is that the industries the retailers that sell these shielding materials for basically EMF, electromagnetic field shielding materials, are on the increase. And what that basically, a lot of people will try to set up like Faraday cages, which is basically the best way to make one way to make a Faraday cage is to take copper screening with where the width of each hole in the screen is smaller than half a wavelength of the frequencies you're trying to shield out. And if you get that completely enclosed in copper screening, high quality copper screening, and you ground that, you can shield a lot of this. And there's also different kinds. There's also wave absorbing materials, and actually some companies are making clothing that's made out of shielded material. They even sell like grounding cables for your heels. Now the issue with the shielding is that people generally find not complete relief from the shielding. It provides partial relief. So some people get frustrated with the shielding. The perpetrators can sweep across many frequencies. Oftentimes they're using very powerful signals, and they can find ways to punch through. The cheapest shielding material that you can get if you become a targeted individual, and one day you just realize this is happening to you, is you might try to make shielding from aluminum foil, which does work, but it is only partially effective. Now, what you find, many reports on YouTube and just from people, is that when people put aluminum foil up, they actually find that after a short period of time, the aluminum foil actually starts to get little tiny, like a shotgun of little tiny pinholes in it. I mean, the signals are actually burning holes through the aluminum foil. So shielding is one of the big questions and issues of targeted individuals. Being in basement units can help. Water is a good shield. Water. Sometimes people will stack up
water bottles. Yes, I've heard that.
Water bottles, because water absorbs certain the kind of microwaves that are used in microwave ovens. Water is very good at absorbing those frequencies, which happen to be often the attack frequencies are in that range. So there's a variety of options, but clearly what the perpetrators are using against us is sometimes very high tech. So it is shielding is only partially effective. And of course, when you're out on the street, you can't go around in a shielded vehicle. You can't go around in a Pope-mobile. So even if you're wearing shielded clothing, any exposed parts of your body, which usually includes your face, is completely unshielded. So the perpetrators know how to go for the soft spots.
Yeah, they do. And I've talked to a lot of people as well, and shielding's tough. Some people do grounding, which is a little bit of a complicated topic. I'm not a scientist. You might know why grounding might potentially work, or at least kind of dampen the fields.
Well, these attacks can induce, I think the attacks are capable of inducing a potential difference. I'm not sure about the theory on grounding either. Certainly, I know this for a fact, that when shielding is grounded, there's two kinds of shielding. There's absorbing materials and there's shielding materials, metallic conductive shielding materials. And the conductive materials work way better if they're grounded. But oftentimes the home ground, the third prong, is not set up right. So a lot of TIs will actually make their own grounding stake that goes way into the earth. So shielding works better when it's grounded. Now, as for grounding the body, it makes sense that during an attack, you might be able to bleed off some of the induced energy through a ground, but I don't know. I can't explain why, like, grounding yourself between attacks would help you. So grounding plays a role, but the effects of these microwave signals on biological tissues is somewhat complicated. So I can't really answer that question as to why people should ground themselves.
Yeah, and nutrition, because, a lot of this has radiation or has radiation byproducts. So basically, I know that taking care of your health is really important, and seek help or anything that has potassium and iodine, but you have to be very careful with that. You can disrupt your thyroid, so that's something you have to be really looked into, and people use a lot of natural products trying to help heal the body, because this is, it destroys the body on a slow speed. Sometimes, quite quickly, as Matthew mentioned earlier, sometimes people will have burns or what appears to be like bruising in the areas, as our friend Midge, we have pictures of a friend and she had like black eyes. So it varies. Go ahead now.
Thanks a lot, Ella, for for letting me on your first show.
Thank you, Dr. Aaron, and don't forget to tune in next week. We have NSA whistleblower Karen Stewart, so don't miss it here on Studio B.
Open your eyes to banks that are robbing you. You know who my favorite president was? Who? Thomas Jefferson. Because he saw all of this coming and tried to stop it. He fought the banks. JFK too, and they killed him for it. The banking institution is more dangerous than an army, he said. He also said that every generation needs a revolution, Jimmy. The American dream is just that. Just a dream. War is a continuation of politics, only by other means. Politics is a continuation of economics by other means. This is our bank. This is our war. And this is our plan of attack.
Banks have become an essential threat to our democracy. So consider this justice.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio! The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Good afternoon. My name is Ella Free, and this is the very first podcast of Whistleblower Nation. First off, I just want to say I couldn't be more grateful to be working with such an incredible group of people here at Revolution Radio. Everyone has been so warm and inviting and helpful to me, so I just want to give a shout out to them. But please bear with me through any technical glitches and hiccups that may occur. And I want to say thank you, Ahmad, for producing the show today. Really appreciate it. Well, let's first talk about the meaning of the word whistleblower. In a country where speaking the truth is sometimes regarded as treason, I have the utmost respect for people who stand up to injustice. A whistleblower is a person who makes public disclosures of wrongdoing, corruption, and crime. The courageous people who do so often suffer retaliatory actions because of their disclosures. This show is dedicated to all you courageous whistleblowers out there who step up to expose injustices when and where other relevant government agencies and social institutions fail to do so. My main goal is to provide a platform for whistleblowers to share their disclosures and tell their stories. I also want to celebrate the heroism of unsung whistleblowers to help encourage more and more people to engage in this important civic duty, because shining the light on wrongdoing wherever it occurs plays an important role in keeping society peaceful, free and just. So that right there is the purpose of the show. Today, I'm going to introduce you to a topic that is near and dear to my heart. It's a crime that needs to be exposed, and it needs to be exposed the most is because it's one that is actively harming thousands and thousands of outspoken victims, yet does not get any official recognition or action at all. The most important current examples of such crimes are organized stalking and electric harassment, which are harming untold numbers of so-called targeted individuals across the globe. These are covert crimes, so they're easy for the law enforcement and government officials to ignore, even those whose duty it is to enforce the rule and law and protect public safety. Many of you probably haven't heard about these covert crimes before. They're big, they're complicated topics, and I think one of the best ways to introduce you to these crimes is to have a victim and whistleblower tell you about his criminal targeting and
for doing so. So probably only a small fraction of people are speaking out about these crimes right now.
Yeah, I agree. Well, maybe we can backtrack just a little bit. We touched upon the topic of the weapons, the electronic weapons. Can we go into a little bit of detail about these weapons and what you experienced and maybe various other weapons that might be out there?
Well, I think, so I had my firsthand experience, which I documented in a report that I sent to the Attorney General of Canada, the RCMP, the Chief of Police in Vancouver, the Mayor of Vancouver, and the FBI. And I was careful to document that without reaching out and checking internet sources for other stories, because I wanted to keep my allegation unbiased. And just based on the principles and the effects that I experienced, I was pretty sure that the weapons that were used on me were basically analogous to anti-personnel weapons systems that are in development and even in use by the U.S. military that use radio frequency energy, which includes microwave energy. There are also, it's also likely, or sorry, I didn't mean to say likely. It's also possible that sonic weapons are being used, and those would probably be most likely to be, if they are used, ultrasonic weapons that are above our hearing range. And so the two kinds of weapons together are what's referred to as directed energy weapons, because they basically fire energy sources in a directed fashion or a beam-like fashion. And because sound is invisible, and if it's ultrasonic, it's not audible either. And the same is true of radio wave energy and microwave energy. It's invisible, and it doesn't make a sound. And so when you beam these at people, basically what you can do is do attacks on someone that can happen right next to bystanders. I'm talking like feet away from bystanders, and the person can be targeted precisely and covertly, because it's not like a gun. If someone started shooting a gun at someone, there would be bullets left in the street, there would be casings left, the sounds would be heard, and that's more of a traditional form of assault. But these new kinds of assaults come with a whole new range of tactics, because really these are covert implements, covert weapons.
Let's see. Can you go into a little bit about the physical sensations? I know these are very, very painful weapons, and I'm just curious what how you perceived it as far as the physical part of this.
Well, let's introduce the listeners to a bit of news that's circulating right now, because that's relevant to your question. And that is approximately at the end of last year, beginning of this year, around that time period, diplomats were being targeted with mysterious electronic weapons in Cuba. And this is now hitting the mainstream news, and the story is not going away, which is something that the targeted individual community is glad to see. This is starting to get some coverage. And these, I think the number now is 21 U.S. diplomats. The number is up to 21. In addition, 5 families of Canadian diplomats in Cuba, I'm not sure of the location, I think it must be Havana, were targeted. They were targeted in places like hotel rooms and even in their own homes. And this is, any of the listeners can go out and look at these stories for themselves by just searching on these keywords of like mysterious assaults in Cuba against Canadian and American diplomats. And what the victims in this case reported were things like grinding sounds in their ears or buzzing sounds and trembling in their body and also hearing loss. And some of them, many of them went to the hospital, and some of them suffered mild to moderate brain injuries. And these symptoms, which are now in the mainstream news, documented, are very, very much like the kinds of things that targeted individuals who don't get any help from police and who don't get coverage by the media are reporting. So it seems like that cluster of diplomats got attention from the media because, first of all, because they're diplomats and because it was a cluster of many people, and it's hard to keep that quiet. So what targeted individuals in the community of victims that you and I are both a part of, we're trying to do activism to raise awareness. In fact, there was a call last night in which Linda Costanzo, who is one of the moderators and activists in our community, she enumerated a list of common effects that are alleged. I'm using that word alleged because I'm trying to be fair and objective, but reported, I should say reported. The effects that are commonly reported by targeted individuals, her list was something like pain, stinging sensations, an electrical feeling in your body, a buzzing sensation, a tingling sensation on your skin, very uncomfortable. Also, immediate onset of nausea, extreme nausea, uncontrolled body movements. The effects can also include dramatic mood swings like immediate anxiety, fear, depression. Also, these attacks can leave lesions on your body. Those have been documented by many people, and these would include things like sunburn, like bizarre sunburn spots appearing on your body where you feel the pain, maybe minutes to a couple hours after you felt the pain, welts, bruises, capillary damage, not just in random spots, but in the spots where you feel these jolts of energetic pain entering your body. It can be accompanied by hair loss that's inexplicable. Like in my case, one time I was hit on one of my eyebrows and a big welt formed there and half of my eyebrow fell out. It grew back, fortunately. And then we get on to the more exotic effects, but which also have a scientific basis. Believe it or not, people report the microwave auditory effect, or what people in our community call V2K, voice to skull. And that is under certain circumstances, and not everyone gets this, but when the perpetrator groups have certain devices, they can send a modulated signal which actually can have a voice, cause a voice to be heard only to the targeted person. And I can get into the details behind that. That is a scientifically validated.
Vancouver, Canada. And that man happens to be a dear friend of mine, so I want to welcome Dr. Matthew Aaron. First off, I want to tell you a little bit about him. The crimes of organized stalking and electronic harassment are so pervasive and destructive that Dr. Aaron is using an alias to protect himself from future retaliation and targeting. Dr. Aaron happens to have a master's degree in environmental toxicology from Virginia Tech and a PhD in neurobiology from Cornell University. As a recipient of the prestigious Fulbright Scholarship, Dr. Aaron also spent a year studying chemical engineering at the University of Karlsruhe in Germany. I hope I said that right. He has authored 34 peer-reviewed publications in the world's top scientific journals. Dr. Aaron's scientific training and background helped him make certain insights about the high-tech criminals and crimes that were perpetrated against him up in Canada. So hi, Matthew. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Ella. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I have a little bit of a cold, guys, so bear with me. But, you know, as the saying goes, the show must go on.
Thank you for the generous introduction.
Well, no problem. You have a very, academic background. I think that's important for credibility's sake. And I guess the first question I have for you, since this is a new topic for many listeners, is what exactly is a targeted individual, Matthew?
A targeted individual in the sense that the community of victims that I'm now a part of uses refers to an individual that has been targeted by a new form of covert crime that involves those two elements in various degrees that you mentioned: organized stalking and electronic harassment. Are you there?
Yes, sorry about that. You caught me and I was running to grab a notebook real quick. Okay, so I guess my question to you is, we understand that this has happened to you. When did you first notice something was out of kilter when you were up in Vancouver, Canada?
I left that last question. I gave a short answer to that last question. And I just wanted to, let me just say that these are very big and complicated crimes. And I think over the course of this interview and podcast, we can explore that more. I did give a very brief answer that doesn't do justice to the complexity and the destructiveness of these crimes. But I think over the course of this podcast, we can hopefully convey more about what those topics are all about. So your question to me was, when did I first notice something was going on in Vancouver, correct?
Yes, correct.
Well, I was not targeted before I went to Vancouver, and I had taken a consulting job at an environmental consulting company that basically has clients mostly in the mining industry. And I moved into an apartment right in the center of downtown Vancouver. And even on the first night that I moved into that new apartment, this apartment was up on the 15th floor, and it faced the alleyway, not the street in the front of the building, but it faced the alleyway. And just across this fairly narrow alley was a non-residential building in which I noticed a lot of really bizarre activities. Are you still there, Ella? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay. And we can get into some of those activities, but it was over the course of time that I realized that there were people in this non-residential building 24/7, and they were actually doing a lot of what you could call spying or voyeurism, or even it actually looked like surveillance of other downtown residents and myself. And they were also engaged in like visual harassment of residents. And this activity slowly escalated over time. And I made it clear to them that I saw what they were doing, and I even confronted some of the people that were leaving that building on the weekend. I actually confronted them in person to tell them that what they were doing was outrageous and criminal, and that if they didn't stop, I was going to try to expose what they were doing. And then that confrontation precipitated a 6-week period of intensive targeting when I realized what electronic harassment is all about. So in the initial phase, over the course of 2 years, I was on the recipient end of low-level harassment, and in hindsight, what I regard as low-level electronic harassment. But then when I was targeted with sort of like the full force of their what do you want to call it, perpetrator squad, then it really amped up, and some of those the attacks just came one after the other, and they were I perceived them as having life-threatening force at times. So I eventually had to just abandon everything in Vancouver. Fortunately, I did collect some, what I think of as potentially significant evidence along the way when I was finally abandoning my apartment and leaving all my things behind. But I was literally pursued across the border by a harassment network. And then I think I managed to shake their tail after arriving in Seattle, because since that day, since starting the next day, I haven't experienced any more of the harassment or following. So either they decided to leave me alone, or I actually managed to evade them and get off their radar.
Yeah, from what I understand, that's rare too. So I applaud you for being able to escape them.
Yeah, that's one thing we should make clear. I think the listeners, these might be very new topics to the listeners. So maybe we should go back and explore just in general what I'm giving you my version of these new topics of targeted individual, electronic harassment, and organized stalking. But maybe we should explore those a little bit further to give the listeners an idea of what we're talking about. One key thing to point out is that I came to realize later that there are thousands of people around the globe. I mean, it's hard to count. Many of them are probably not speaking up because this is a very terrifying kind of vigilante crime that involves basically organized crime networks, the way I view it, possibly with some government involvement at some corrupt level. But there's people making allegations of being electronically harassed. That is a euphemism, by the way. It is much more dangerous than what people would think of as harassment. These are weapons that they're using, high-tech weapons. And there's, so basically, you and I both know that this is a big issue affecting a lot of people.
Yes. Yeah, probably tens of thousands, if not more. It's one of those things we can only speculate the numbers.
And I think it's pretty fair to say that the number of people that are speaking up is probably just a small fraction of the total number of victims, because these crimes are terrifying, and oftentimes when people speak up, as you mentioned at the outset, people who speak up against injustices and crimes, they often get retaliation.